Hello there, and welcome to the Unqualified Opinions podcast. This is episode 4. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marco Yerkovich. I'm joined by Will Byerman.
Hey, if they won't sing Shallow with you, they ain't your real friends, eh?
And Tim Seipel.
What's groovin'?
All right, so we've got a ton of topics to get through today. Some major NFL teams struggling, a huge disaster controversy with NBA and China, our NFL power rankings for this week, and a few other things. So let's get right into it with Rockets general manager Darryl Morey. Obviously, he sent out a tweet that kind of has sent the NBA world and the Chinese business world kind of into a spiral. What do you guys make of what went down?
I really have very little idea what to do with this situation. I mean, you and me talk a lot about how interested we are with the concept of the NBA, especially being able to continue its influence, to spread its influence and develop little leagues and just bring more players in from around the globe. But this is the kind of the bad side of that. Is it's really difficult to kind of circumnavigate some of these political issues. And Darryl Morey, on the one hand, I don't think it was a smart idea for him to send that tweet, knowing his position as an executive in the NBA, especially for the Houston Rockets, who are one of the most popular teams in China, because obviously Yao Ming kind of really spearheaded that basketball movement there. But also, it's really good to see the NBA being willing to stand up for its employees, regardless of their decision, even though I don't think it was a good one. I'm very, very happy to see the NBA is willing to take a leap of faith and kind of stand out there for their employee.
Yeah, so obviously, due to the fallout of this comment, China has they've decided not to broadcast any NBA games this season. They have terminated contracts with the Houston Rockets, players like Klay Thompson that are very popular over there. So do you think, Tim, that this kind of, let's call it an NBA ban that China's implementing, do you think this is sustainable? Do you think the fanship will overcome this ban, or how do you think this will end?
I honestly can't really say. The way that China's government works is it's a very overpowering and dominative government over its citizens and its people. So whether or not there's a big fan outcry, I do not know what the response of China's government would be. And right now, I would err on the side of that they're really going to be struggling trying to, the fans are not going to have the NBA. What it looks like right now. And it's crazy that so there are a lot of fans in China who are not going to be able to view these or have the games come to China, and this will just really affect the general fan population. I think we might see a decline in fans in China.
Well, obviously, because that kind of agenda will be peddled by the government, that's what a lot of the citizens will come to believe. However, I think we need to understand that I think the fanship that has already been developed in the NBA over the past how many years is strong enough to probably curtail this. But do you guys think that the NBA needs to be more careful in its global expansion and how it deals with other cultures and other markets in the future?
For sure. And I mean, this is a kind of a newer situation. I feel like if I heard there was a major issue with another country in the NBA, I kind of would have thought they said something or did something that was kind of insensitive or offensive. I mean, as if we're talking about individual people tweeting stuff. But again, this is a really tough one. And I think the closest thing we see to it is the whole Enes Kanter deal they've had with Turkey, just as far as I think that's the closest we've seen the NBA to having an actual large problem with a foreign country.
Right, and a social stance at that within a foreign country's, should we say, cultural values.
It's going to be really interesting to see what actually happens here because, again, what are the odds the Chinese fans are going to just be like, okay, cool, no basketball this season? People, in China, I'm assuming it's harder, but if people really want to watch basketball, they'll always find a way on the internet. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if this is that sustainable, but boy, it's certainly a rough position for Darryl Morey. I heard they seriously considered firing him. They obviously didn't. But it's not good
but
for him to be almost single-handedly responsible for the league's whole billion-dollar industry in China being in jeopardy.
So Tim, your thoughts on maybe what kind of business reaction the NBA will have to this? Obviously, we saw their kind of social reaction and discussing kind of the issues of it. But what do you think is a business they're going to do in the future or right now to kind of adapt to this situation?
I think Will kind of hit it. You have to be careful of other people's cultures. And, China is such an unpredictable government. And so that's why I right now think that China might be able to sustain the ban. But as a business, you have to be careful who is getting your product, who is buying your product, and you have to be careful with what you do according to the main source. And obviously, the United States is a big product or a big
right. I mean,
profit.
The idea is that in America there are First Amendment rights that people have that Darryl Morey was very clearly and safely exercising. He was just stating his opinion based on facts that he knew. And obviously, we're not necessarily going to discuss the humanitarian side of this, which is quite tragic in its own right. But I mean, I'm glad that Darryl Morey said something, actually, because while this may cost the NBA right now, I think what Adam Silver and the league and the American NBA fan public need to understand is this is possibly a necessary evil in kind of discussing how we deal with other markets that don't necessarily have the same ideas or cultural values that we do. So yeah, there's a lot going on there with that whole Darryl Morey Twitter situation. I don't think I've seen a tweet from a non-politician create more of a global economic shift, maybe other than an Elon Musk tweet. But so let's move on to some NFL news. Some teams that are kind of struggling right now: Cleveland Browns, Dallas Cowboys, Kansas City Chiefs, all had very bad weekends, all lost games that they were projected to win. So who do you think of those three teams is in the biggest trouble right now?
Well, it's not the Chiefs for sure. I mean, they struggle against the Lions, they struggle against the Colts, but neither of those are really, I wouldn't say they're elite contenders yet, but they're both
30th
tough
in
out.
defense.
They're tough outs, though. I think the Chiefs are certainly having their struggles, but I don't really see them doing anything that makes me doubt them too terribly. I think it's got to be the Cleveland Browns just because of the magnitude in which they fell off there. Baker Mayfield, I don't think I like what Stephen A. Smith said. He's not a scrub. He's overrated. I'm a big Baker Mayfield guy. I really think he has a Pro Bowl future in this league, but I can't really say that I can guarantee that I don't think he's going to be able to keep that momentum from his rookie year going 100%. I think we expect all quarterbacks to usually have some kind of sophomore slump action, but I don't know. He's having a rougher one than most, but that offensive line isn't helping him. Either way, though, Freddie Kitchens doesn't have a lot of time because they're going to blame him much faster than they're going to blame Baker.
Right, because Baker Mayfield was successful at Oklahoma and even in his first season under Todd Haley, the offensive coordinator. But I think that Baker Mayfield will probably see a lot more action as far as criticism is concerned, as he becomes more experienced. But I do think you're correct that Freddie Kitchens is going to be the first one to fall on the sword. It'll be interesting to see who they give a call to. Maybe Lincoln Riley, of course, from Oklahoma. But that's beside the point. Tim, who do you think of these three teams is struggling the most right now?
So obviously I'm going to have to go with the idea that the Chiefs are not in big trouble.
Right, not big trouble right now.
The Colts are a good football team, and it's going to be a very competitive. They're going to be competing for the playoffs. Right now, I think the Cowboys are in the most trouble. The Cowboys are in the most trouble because they have the biggest drop-off. I mean, starting off, was it 4-0, right?
3-0.
And then dropping 2 games in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got such a passionate fan base, and the fact that they have dropped 2 games in a row is going to really affect them as a team, and we just have to see how well they will recover. Obviously, Jerry Jones has assured Jason Garrett that his job is safe, but, I mean, to a certain extent, you have to be careful how much lenience you give to a head coach because it's been, 4 playoff wins for the Cowboys?
In 11 years under his tenure?
I mean, I personally think Jerry Jones has to be more strict with Jason Garrett, and right now he's just not providing, and I honestly think the Cowboys are in the biggest trouble.
And just to add to what Tim was saying about Jason Garrett, one thing you have to remember now is Kellen Moore is really kind of becoming a big name as an offensive coordinator. He's really young. He really gets the system. Super huge. He was an amazing quarterback in Boise State, all-time NCAA football wins record. How long can he hold off Kellen Moore? If Kellen Moore's star continues to rise and Jason Garrett continues to be mediocre, he's got an in-house replacement ready. I think he's going to have to worry about soon.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So talking about fixing those issues, which of these three teams, and we're not picking one team in particular, but of these three teams, which of them right now do you guys think can still win their division between the Browns, Cowboys, and the Chiefs?
Chiefs.
I think the Chiefs are easily they can still easily win their division. But
I honestly think all three teams can probably still win their division. When you look at it, Cleveland is still pretty much can control their destiny in the AFC North. And when you look at the NFC East, the Eagles are an issue, but I believe that the Cowboys still have plenty of time to recover.
I mean, with the resurgence of Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, I mean, I hate to say it, but the Giants might be kind of an upset look in some of the games in the NFC East. And, you know, I personally think that the Cowboys, at the end of the day, could lose to them.
That's I don't really know about that one.
That might be a hot take.
That's a bit much there.
With Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard and Saquon Barkley, with all of them back, I personally think that the Giants could compete with the Cowboys because the Cowboys' defense did not look great against the Packers' offense, at least in the first half.
Well, speaking of kind of comparing teams right now, let's just quickly move on to our NFL power rankings for Week 6. I'm just going to quickly run through them, and then we can just kind of debate the placement. And just really quick, a few teams that I had just on the outside. Obviously, the Houston Texans and the Minnesota Vikings just missed the cut. At 10, I've got the Carolina Panthers being led by Kyle Allen. And let's not shy away from this. Christian McCaffrey, MVP candidate right now. Number 9, the Buffalo Bills, probably the first or second best defense in the league. Number 8, the Los Angeles Rams, still looking for an offensive identity, but a lot of talent, and they can figure it out. They have plenty of time. 7, the Kansas City Chiefs, just no run defense or pass defense to speak of, and I know their offense is one of the all-time best, but it really comes down to your defense in the playoffs. So that is a problem for the Chiefs. Number 6, I've got the Packers, who have overall been one of the most solid teams in the league. And then at 5, I've got the Eagles, just because they beat the Packers. They didn't look better than the Packers. They just, a win's a win, so I just have them just above the Packers. 4, I've got the Seahawks, who are probably the hottest team outside of New England right now in the league. And then 3, I've got the Saints, who are still cruising, even with Teddy Bridgewater behind center. Number 2, I've got the 49ers, one of the only undefeated team in the NFC and one of only 2 in the league. The 49ers dismantled the Browns on Monday Night Football and are firing on all cylinders offensively and defensively. Of course, number 1, I've got the Patriots, best coach in the league, best quarterback in the league, and let's be honest, probably a top 2 defense. It's either them or Buffalo, and easily the best secondary in the league by far. So your guys' thoughts on those power rankings, Will?
I mean, look, man, the big thing with that is 49ers at number 2. I mean, if you look at that top 10 list, aside from the Bills with Josh Allen, who still has a lot of potential, and the Saints only because Teddy Bridgewater's in for Drew Brees, the Niners are the only team in the top 10 who you don't see their quarterback and go like, okay, I think that guy can win you a game. I don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo can win you a game. The running backs, Breida, Mostert, and Tevin Coleman especially, I think is really intriguing there, as Tim pointed out before the show. But I think Kyle Shanahan's the only person on that offense, except maybe Kittle, who makes me say, okay, this guy is going to be the reason we win a game. I don't know if the 49ers really have anything all that sustainable. As we said last week, they're kind of like the anti-Broncos, because whereas we could see the Broncos being undefeated, if a few things had gone better, the 49ers could be 0-4 if things had gone worse. Obviously, the Cleveland win was super impressive, but I mean, the Browns are so up and down. I think they're a very hard team to kind of measure yourself against, but I mean, overall, they look pretty good. I think I might have like the Eagles a little higher. Their defense is good. They're still hurt, and they're playing well, and I really trust Carson Wentz's resurgence this year. Other than that 49ers thing, it's a pretty solid list, but I really, really disagree on that 49ers.
It's a tough one, but I do think at some point in the season, we do have to start to reward teams that are undefeated and a very dominant performance against the Browns. I'm not saying they're better than the Saints, obviously. I believe a Saints team without Drew Brees is not as good as the 49ers, but right now it's just the performance, the fact that they're undefeated, and the fact that the Saints don't have Drew Brees. I think those are just some confounding factors.
I would have the 49ers at 8 or 9 or 10, somewhere in that range. Not a believer.
Yeah, that's a fair argument. I just happen to believe in this defense with Bosa on the inside, Richard Sherman on the outside. They're a complete defense, and this offense is quite explosive. Tim, your thoughts on the ranking?
Yeah, so I can see why we have the 49ers and the Patriots in the top two, but I honestly believe that the Patriots are really going to see their first test coming up in a couple weeks. I don't think the Patriots have really been tested much. And
outside of the Bills, I think it's been a pretty easy schedule for them.
Right, and I think that can attest to part of the defensive success. Obviously, they're a really good defense, and I'm not going to put that against them, but I do think that they're closer to a top 5 defense because the teams that they have faced have been pretty easy, so therefore they've been a better defense stat-wise.
We'll see what happens in a few weeks when they play Baltimore and Cleveland. That's really their first real test.
Right.
And then obviously they'll end up playing Buffalo again and a few other tests later on in the season. We'll see how they can kind of react to that. Obviously they'll have the Chiefs and I'm blanking on who else they'll have. I think they'll have the Texans later on in the season.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they can, manage. Obviously, as you said, it's an easier schedule, but right now, speaking from this moment, I think they're the best team in the league from what we've seen and how they've played. But overall, the most dominant.
Something that you can look at is when the Patriots offense finally sees a good defense in the Bills, they really don't do much.
Yeah, they really struggled.
Yeah.
Obviously the injuries played a part in that role in that game, but I think overall that is a fair point to make. It'll be interesting to see how obviously the Patriots and the 49ers, you can say, probably have some of the easier schedules so far in the league. So, and obviously this list is in flux. It's a weekly thing, so we'll get back to it next week. And obviously there will be a lot of shifting, a lot of changing in between this week and next week. So let's move on to our college football playoff contender and pretender for the Week 7 undefeated teams. So right now we have a few teams that we've designated as teams that will not include in this right now because we think they're dominant enough already as unanimous teams that we'll think are playoff contenders, which are Alabama and Ohio State. And then some teams that we've just decided not to include as we don't really see them as true contenders right now. Those include SMU, Wake Forest, Minnesota, Baylor, and Memphis. So let's start off the bat. Actually joining us on the show with Will and Tim is Jared DeHaan and Paul Hires right now. So let's move into this. Let's start with number 2 Clemson. Your guys' thoughts on number 2 Clemson. Anybody hop on in.
I personally think that the only reason Clemson is currently still undefeated is just how poor their schedule is. So I'm actually calling them a pretender as of now because nothing I've seen from them really sticks out to me.
Yeah, you look at probably their most challenging game of the season was North Carolina, and they could have lost to North Carolina if they would have called a better 2-point conversion player, just gotten lucky. So yeah, Clemson. Anybody else with some important thoughts on Clemson right now?
Yeah, so I would say that Clemson is a pretender. And I would say that they don't make the college football playoffs. They're not in my 4 teams right now because of the schedule. And Trevor Lawrence has just been struggling against not super great teams. He hasn't been himself per se, or what we at least saw in the playoffs last year.
Okay, so we've kind of got a pretender. Just a quick hypothetical on that one, Tim, to follow up. Would you say a one-loss Georgia, whose only loss is in the SEC championship game, or an undefeated Clemson? Who would you prefer to make the playoffs in that scenario?
One-loss Georgia.
One-loss Georgia. Yeah, it just really comes down to schedule and how they've performed thus far. Obviously, they can improve on that. Let's quick move on to number 3, Georgia. Do you guys think contender, pretender? Anybody with thoughts on that one?
Contender, but I'll disagree with Tim. I'll fight and die on Trevor Lawrence Hill. I think he's the best college quarterback. I wouldn't say production-wise he's there, but he's the best-looking college quarterback I've seen since Andrew Luck.
Well, there actually was a story that came out in ESPN today that said he's been playing through a shoulder injury for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. So we'll see if he improves. I mean, obviously that's a major injury for a quarterback, but we'll see if he changes it all based on that. Anybody else with thoughts on Georgia contender, pretender?
I mean, Fromm's a great quarterback. The defense is really good. DeAndre Swift is looking like one of the best running backs we've had since Todd Gurley. I think Georgia's definitely a playoff contender, but I think Clemson's up there still.
Yeah, I personally think that Georgia can, if they come out, I mean, they have a really tough schedule, but if they make it through it with maybe one loss, I personally think that Georgia will be a playoff team.
Yeah, I think they're a contender. Definitely the committee has really favored the SEC teams. I don't know if that's based on schedule, probably, but I think, even if they get one loss in this tough schedule, I think they still have a good shot at making the playoff.
Yeah, so let's move on to another team that we're deciding contender, pretender. Number 5, LSU, who has a big matchup this week against Florida.
Big Joe Burrow fan, and that defense for LSU is really good. But again, the big problem here is they're in the SEC, and Alabama, as we know, is the favorite, and we all agree Georgia is a big-time contender. I just don't think there's room for an LSU in the picture when Georgia and Alabama are already like such big contenders there.
Yeah, so I think we can all agree that right now, regardless of LSU's pretty solid resume and play to this point in the season, we all think that Alabama's probably still the better team. So the question to ask is a one-loss LSU team who's second in the SEC West, are they a team that is, going to end up in the college football playoff? Anybody think contender, pretender within that realm of thinking?
I mean, look, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they got Alabama, Auburn, and Florida on their schedule.
Still to go, yeah.
One loss in that schedule, I feel like, would be enough to get them in. And once again, going back to like the SEC and the committee, I would not be surprised to see 2 SEC teams make it in.
Yeah, we did see 2 years ago, was it, that Alabama made it in as the second place team in the SEC West with one loss. So, that can happen, and it has happened in the past. So let's look at the other side of the coin of the matchup on Saturday. Number 7, Florida. Is there a possibility? Are they a contender or are they a pretender?
No, and for one of the reasons is, I was about to say this about LSU after Paul was done, but LSU and Florida, it's kind of all about brand name to a certain point at the college football playoff. Like your Ohio States, Oklahomas, not to mention, of course, Alabama and Clemson. I'd even throw Georgia in there, like the teams that are consistently contenders there. LSU and Florida just really don't have that name recognition I feel like you kind of really need at that point. And again, I think LSU is better than Florida. If LSU is going to struggle to get recognition there because of Georgia and Alabama, Florida's a step behind them even.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair point. Florida's just not quite there. Jared, your thoughts?
Like, I want to say all 4 of these SEC teams are contenders, but the thing is, it's only a 4-team college football playoff, and Alabama and Georgia are clearly the 2 best teams in the SEC right now. So I'm going to have to say pretender on Florida now until I see something different. So if they come out and just smoke LSU, that might change my opinion, but right now I can honestly say they're a pretender when it comes to having 4 teams in the top 7 of rankings.
Yeah, and that is the tough thing right now. Of course, we're talking about 4-team playoffs, and maybe at some point during this season we'll get into a discussion about a 6-team, 8-team, whatever it may be, playoff system. But for right now, we're dealing with 4 teams, and that's kind of where Florida's faltering right now.
Yeah, I would say Florida is a contender.
Really?
Yeah, believe it or not. What they did against Auburn last week kind of opened my eyes to how good that they could be. I picked Auburn against Florida last week in our pick'em games, and seeing them beat Auburn by 11, it just really shows that they can beat a good team. And LSU beat Texas, I believe. They're really only good team on the schedule that they faced so far by 7. So I think this next weekend is going to be a huge huge spot to look at when we see how good teams could be against good competition, because it's going to be a phenomenal game.
Yeah, so another team that is undefeated with a really big matchup this week, number 6, Oklahoma. I know we had kind of been discussing putting them on that list of teams with Ohio State and Alabama that were for sure a lock for the playoffs. Anybody have thoughts on Oklahoma right now, Paul?
Well, I think the Big 12 is really kind of a good idea as far as just having all the teams play everyone in the conference, so there's no easy schedules necessarily. That being said, if they can get past this game on Saturday against Texas and run the table, win the championship, I think they got a good shot, just like the last couple of years.
Boy, do I want to see Oklahoma lose, but I think Lincoln Riley might be the best coach in college football, or at least I think he's the most pro. We talk about pro-ready draft prospects all the time. I'd be surprised if Lincoln Riley's in college for much longer just because he's young, and also the trend right now is to try to get your Sean McVay, your young offensive guru guys. Lincoln Riley's going to get calls from every NFL team
Cleveland.
needs a head coach. Cleveland could be one of them.
Tennessee, possibly.
Any team that parts with their head coach in the next few years is going to call Lincoln Riley first and foremost,
Washington,
I believe. The list goes on.
Anybody.
Any team.
So, Oklahoma looking pretty dominant. Big test against Texas.
Yeah, because
so they're right on the border.
Texas is, I feel like a lot of teams have that one school that will always just mess with them. No matter how good or bad they are, they'll always be able to mess with them. With Alabama, it's definitely Auburn. Auburn sometimes can come in there, find a way to mess up Alabama's season. With Nebraska, Northwestern always randomly gives us way more of a test than they have any right to. And Texas really has been that team for the last couple seasons to Oklahoma. This is a huge one for them.
All right, so let's run through these last 3 really quick. Anybody with some thoughts on Wisconsin's playoff viability? Jared?
Right now I think they're pretender, but the October 26th matchup at Ohio State will really tell us a lot about the Badgers. If Badgers can go in there and even contend and keep it within like a touchdown, and then possibly win the Big Ten West and then make it to the championship game against Ohio State again and win, then they might have a chance. But we just got to wait till then to see if they're really a contender or not.
Yeah, so they haven't really played anyone that challenging outside of Michigan, who they pretty much dominated. So we need a little bit more of a bigger sample size from Wisconsin to truly see where they are on the playoff contender spectrum. So anybody with some thoughts on number 10 Penn State?
They kind of remind me of Florida, what I said about them earlier.
Just not quite there completely.
They're not a contender yet, and not only that, but they're behind another non-contender, because that Wisconsin is to Penn State. What else? You was to Florida. It's a team that's not quite a contender, but they're still pretty far in front of them, and they have to worry about taking them out first.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams right now.
State.
That's what we're getting from this. There's just a lot of teams vying for those 4 spots, and unfortunately for a lot of these teams, your Wisconsins, your Floridas, there's already 2 or 3 teams that are pretty much locked in already. Jared, your thoughts on that?
And then also Penn State is in the same division as Ohio State, when Wisconsin is in a little easier division as the West.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really difficult for Penn State to make the playoffs.
So, let's talk about one group of 5 team before we get going. I know the odds of them making the playoffs are not great, but they've played a pretty solid schedule to this point and should play a few more ranked teams from the Mountain West to this point. Later on in the season, number 15, Boise State. Anybody with thoughts on their playoff viability, contender, pretender?
The interesting thing I'd say with them is I talked about like name recognition, and they might be Central Florida is a team that I think is only recognizable in name because of how much they've annoyed the college football playoff. But Boise State, if you go back to the early 2000s, 2010s, they've always been that one team they were kind of a reason a lot of people supported the playoff. They're like, okay, Boise State went undefeated this season and they got to play in the Fiesta Bowl or whatever. Why is this team not getting a shot at the championship? Let's see how good they can actually do. I think Boise State is the name for it, but Mountain West is difficult. Jordan Love at Utah State's a phenomenal quarterback.
They gave
really
LSU troubles at times.
He's really looking like a first-round prospect. Air Force is always good. Wyoming's good this year. even Hawaii really kind of blowing it up on offense. Boise State's going to have a tough time getting through the Mountain West, but realistically, I think just because of the Boise State brand, if they can stay undefeated, win that conference, I think they can make a pretty strong push.
Well, if not for the playoffs, they're for sure going to be the Group of 5 representative in the near 6 bowls. That seems pretty clear cut if they make it undefeated. So let's move on to our final segment of the day, the Wednesday weekly pick'em wagers. So our first game of the day, we've got number 6 Oklahoma against number 11 Texas. Obviously, it's at the Cotton Bowl. That's Saturday at 11 o'clock on Fox.
Yeah, Red River rivalry time, boys, and this one's gonna be fun. I mean, don't like really either teams, but taking a look at this matchup, you can't ignore Jalen Hurts. Struggled a little bit early against Kansas last week, but I got Oklahoma because I just think they're gonna do too good on offense.
All right, Tim.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the upset here. I'm going to pick Texas over Oklahoma. I think Alinger at quarterback for Texas is going to do a good job.
All right, Jared, who do you have in this one?
I have Oklahoma easily. I think Hurts gets it done and does really well.
All right, Will.
Big fan of Alinger, but I think Oklahoma's too much for Texas to stop.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Oklahoma as well on that one. Just Lincoln Riley and his offensive ability to get Jalen Hurts just wide open receivers all over the field. So, yeah, I'm going with Oklahoma on this one. So, our second matchup of the day, number 10 Penn State against number 17 Iowa, Saturday 6:30 on ABC. Paul, who do you have in that one?
Watching the Hawkeyes offense sputter to a slowing halt last week was depressing. I don't know how Iowa fans do it, but I can't pick them 2 weeks in a row. I got Penn State.
All right, Tim.
I'm right there with Paul. I gotta pick. I gotta pick Penn State over Iowa. I think Penn State's gonna make a pretty big lead against Iowa, and Iowa's not gonna be able to come back.
All right, Jared.
I'm going to go with Iowa here. I think,
Wow.
like last week, Iowa looked terrible. I have to say that. But I think they're going to come out with a vengeance, and I think they're going to get it done against the Nittany Lions.
All right, Will.
First of all, second pickup game today, you've mentioned that I've seen both teams. It's been like, oh, gross. But I agree with Jared. I think Iowa's going to pull it off. I trust Nathan Stanley.
Nate Stanley, yeah.
Stanley.
Yeah.
I trust him as a quarterback, and more importantly, Penn State, Michigan. I don't trust him. I don't trust them to win big games. And I think that Iowa's just the one thing they're always going to have, aside from AJ Epinesa, who's an incredible pro prospect, the one thing Iowa's going to have is they're well coached, they're well disciplined, and they're going to put together a solid, just all-around team effort.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with Penn State on this one. They just seem to have more athletes. I just think overall they're going to overpower Iowa later on. I don't think Penn State has the defense that Michigan has, but I think Penn State's offense is far superior to Michigan's in correlation to how they will play Iowa. So I got Penn State in that one. Moving on to our final college football game of the day, we got number 7 Florida at number 5 LSU, Saturday 7 o'clock on ESPN. Paul, who do you have in that one?
Yeah, the big game of the day. This is going to ultimately come down to LSU's high-powered offense with Joe Burrow, Heisman contender, against that Florida Gator defense. Man, it's a hard pick. For lack of being able to pick a game, I just got to go with LSU as the home team.
All right, Tim.
I went with Auburn last week against Florida, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'm going to go with Florida over LSU.
All right, Jared.
I have LSU, but I think it's not going to be a 13-point game like it has. I think it's going to be a touchdown win by the Tigers.
Okay, Will?
It comes down to quarterback for me. Kyle Trask has done some nice stuff. He's a really cool story. I think I saw something about him like not having actually started a football game since like sophomore year in high school or something. But Joe Burrow's legit. I really like him as a pro prospect, as a college quarterback. I think he's the guy to get it done. He's going to win this game for him.
I totally agree with you. I've got LSU in this one. Obviously, it's going to be a really tight one, but yeah, I've got the Tigers. All right, so moving on to some NFL action, we got the Seattle Seahawks against the Cleveland Browns Sunday at noon on Fox. Paul, who do you have in this one?
Well, I picked the wrong team last week for both these two teams' matchups. I think the Browns will come back, but I I do think Seattle gets the win on the road here.
All right, so you got Seattle. Tim, who do you have?
I think it's no competition. Seattle totally wipes the floor with the Browns.
Jared?
I totally agree with Tim. I think it's not even close. Seattle big.
Will?
Freddie Kitchens' seat's about to get a whole lot hotter after this one. I don't think the Browns have a shot against Seattle.
And it's about to get flaming hot because all 5 of us just picked Seattle, which is probably not a good sign for Seattle, but, we'll see how it goes. So, when all of us pick a team, it's not always a great idea. So, moving on to our second NFL matchup of the day, we've got the Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs Sunday at noon on CBS. Paul, who do you have in that one?
Well, as a Kansas City fan, I got to go with the Chiefs, but as a non-biased fan, I'll tell you the Chiefs will not back away just because they lost.
All right. Tim?
Yeah, I got to go with the Chiefs on this one. I think the Texans' defense isn't good enough against the high-powered offense that Patrick Mahomes has been leading.
All right.
I'm going to go with Kansas City Chiefs as well. I think Mahomes has a big day.
Will?
I really, really, really want to be able to pick the Texans here. Deshaun Watson looked amazing last week. The Chiefs have really kind of struggled a little bit. I mean, I guess it's a struggle for them, not for most teams, but they haven't been themselves the last 2 weeks. But I still think the Chiefs are going to win this one.
I really want to pick the Texans. I really do, just like you said, Will, but they gave up 32 points to the Falcons. That does not bode well. Their offense was firing on all cylinders last week, so they, obviously scored quite a bit on the Falcons themselves, but I just can't quite pull the trigger on this one. I have to go with the Chiefs, but it's going to be a high-scoring affair, but I've still got the Chiefs in that one. So moving on to our final matchup of the day, we've got the San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams Sunday at 3 o'clock on Fox.
Based off of what these two teams did last week, a lot would say to go with San Francisco, but every given Sunday, anything can happen. And for that reason, I'm going to go with the Rams. I think just the talent is going to prevail in this one.
All right, Tim?
I think the 49ers face their actual first tough opponent, and I think the Rams will come out on this one. I think the 49ers will be shown as a pretender and not an actual competitor in the division that they're in.
All right, Jared, who do you have in that one?
I have the Rams as well. I think after this week, Patriots will be the last undefeated team.
All right, Will?
49ers are playing with the backup left tackle who will now have to deal with Aaron Donald. That's bad news for Jimmy Garoppolo, who's already been really mediocre while the Lions held up so far. Also, Cooper Kupp, man, can't beat him.
Well, this game is really important for both teams. Obviously, to really establish themselves as a truly dominant team, the 49ers would need to win this game. To stay in the playoff hunt, the Rams need to win this one. I have to go with the 49ers just barely. I just think their offense is so dynamic, and right now the Rams defense, especially at corner, is really, Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib are really struggling right now, so I just have to go with the 49ers on this one. All right, so that's it for episode 4 of the Unqualified Opinions podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.